David Adler is an icon of the eclecticism of American style of architecture of the early 20th century.
It's a masterpiece.
It is a masterpiece. We say, why have one English country house when you can have two? So Adler married the facades of both houses. You never go wrong by trusting David Adler because he's absolutely right with the colors, the textures, the scale. The furniture is all a wonderful balance of different styles, uniquely blended to provide his own modern flair, but to these traditional styles put together.
Hi, I'm Kristen Noel Smith. If you enjoy classical architecture and history, you will love the work of David Adler. He was one of the greatest residential architects of the first half of the 20th century. He had exceptional skills, high standards, and incredible taste. A number of his homes are now in the National Register of Historic Places. And although his work is located around the country, he was Chicago's society architect of the very wealthy. Beauty indeed matters and is a universal need of human beings. David Adler created classical beauty, as you will see in the homes featured in this program.
David Adler was born in Milwaukee in 1882. For context, this is the year Thomas Edison began the first commercial electrical power plant, lighting 1 square mile of lower Manhattan. The Standard Oil Trust is created by John D. Rockefeller and his associates. And Buffalo Bill's Wild West show debuts. It was also the heart of the Gilded Age for architecture in America. The period of monopolistic industrial expansion whose financial gains led to the birth of the palatial mansions on Fifth Avenue, in Newport, Rhode Island, and elsewhere. David grew up in a successful, entrepreneurial German-Jewish family. His grandfather emigrated from Bohemia in the mid-1800s and founded a prosperous men's clothing company. David's father took over running the family business. Their clothing enterprise spanned many decades, but in 1929, 4 years after his father's death, it was sold off, as the career interests of David and his sister were elsewhere. Tragically, David's older brother Murray died as a young child of diphtheria, now preventable by vaccine and treated with antibiotics. His younger sister Frances became known in her own right for her extremely sophisticated, beautiful, avant-garde interiors. They had a very close relationship throughout their lives and collaborated professionally on numerous interiors. Both had superior, innate, and honed abilities for design. We can only wonder, was another gifted Adler artist lost to the world in the young death of their brother?
David Adler is an icon of the eclecticism of American style of architecture of the early 20th century, and that he could combine architectural styles. He was historicist, so he used different types of architectural choices, but that's very typically American, as opposed to being, one Baroque or Georgian, what we see in other countries, very typical of that era. He pulls from all these different eras, and I think his ability to do that was on such a human scale with so much taste and so much grandeur at the same time really sets him apart. It really is something that should be honored as part of the Chicago's architectural tradition, as well as what we have across the country in America.
Richard Teller Crane Jr. ran Crane Company, an industrial empire that his father and uncle founded in Chicago in the mid-1800s. It primarily manufactured plumbing supplies, pipe fittings, steam engines, and elevators. By 1910, the Chicago plant employed over 5,000 people. It's been noted he was a very respected, beloved leader of thousands in his workforce. Richard Crane Jr. pioneered the idea of the beautiful bathroom in the 1920s. Up to then, they were mostly dull and utilitarian. Much later, the Crane plumbing unit was sold off in 1990 to be part of American Standard brands. Mrs. Florence Crane was a daughter of Harlow Higginbotham. He was a leading American merchant and a longtime associate of Mr. Field at Marshall Field and Company in Chicago. He was also the director of the 1893 World's Clumbing Exposition and the head of the Chicago Field Museum of Natural History for a decade. The Great House on Castle Hill is the second home Adler designed for the Cranes. The first one was built on Jekyll Island, Georgia, in 1917. Described as where the richest, the most exclusive, the most inaccessible club in the world was. The Crane Cottage was the largest, most lavish of the cottages. Others were owned by the Rockefellers, Morgans, Vanderbilts, Pulitzers, and Bakers. The Cranes were avid sailors. In 1928, they even financed and led an expedition to the South Pacific on their yacht Illyria. David Adler was asked to design this home on an existing foundation from an earlier residence that Mrs. Crane did not like. She wanted her husband to tear it down, and so he eventually did. Their main residence was on Lakeshore Drive in Chicago.
Here he was inspired by primarily two country houses, Belton House in Lincolnshire and Ham House in Richmond area of Surrey. I'm sure he also had others in his library like Eagle House and Eltham Lodge and Coles Hill, but primarily Ham House was the inspiration, we believe, for that north-facing facade of the house. And so he has this Stuart style, this late 17th century style house. Really, both sides are that era of sort of the manner of Sir Christopher Wren and his contemporaries. We always say, why have one English country house when you can have two? So Adler married the facades of both houses and copied the cupola on the top of the roof from Belton House. Adler used beautiful, very ornamental Baroque and Queen Anne style ornamentation on the facade of the house. So just over the door, these wonderful elaborate corbels with acanthus leaves and this Queen Anne door hood, which we believe he found from his extensive library, a book about English doorways of the later Renaissance, 1660 to 1830, that was published in 1925. Where the original location was, we're not sure. But again, he had this beautiful, very ornamental hood in sandstone over the doorway of the Crane estate. And then above, we see in the pediment a circular window with a grotesque sort of a mask in the front and leafage on the sides. So Adler, being meticulous for details as he was, incorporated these wonderful fruit and floral motifs, which you also see on the Grinling Gibbons carvings in the library, real highlights of the Crane house here in Ipswich, also on the cast-lead downspouts of the house. So you have these long downspouts with the fruit and floral motifs, just what you see in the Grinling Gibbons, and classic for the Crane house because the Cranes were masters of water flow technology. This is what their business was. So they would collect rainwater from and go through the downspouts, and it would all gather in this 131,000-gallon cistern underneath the bowling green and allowed them to irrigate the property. So very green technology that would be very, we've actually retrofitted it and rehabilitated it. So it is now working to irrigate our trees, which we've replanted on the Grand Allée back in 2010 to 2012. We completely replanted that and using the brilliant Crane technology of the water flowing through those beautiful downspouts and then underground, we're able to use that Crane technology today and help irrigate Castle Hill. But that north-facing, sort of facing the ocean facade had very dramatic sandstone niches with the busts that supposedly are the Caesars on the back of the house. And if you do go to Richmond and see Ham House, you'll see the striking similarity actually to the house, but not a direct translation. Adler never really directly copied. He made it his own by incorporating new materials.
Of the many incredible architectural features that Adler designed for this home, this color brick is wonderful.
It is quite striking. It's a pink Holland brick that he used, very different than the sort of red colonial that you see in New England, but it was a very soft color. Went with the sandstone trim all around the coins around it, and the wonderful ornamental door hood he has, the pediments, and the paint that's on the cupola and the windows. All gives that very soft, more European or English feel to it.
It was made to look originally aged.
Yes, absolutely. Adler was very selective about his use of colors and patinas inside and out. So we did have this pink Holland brick that does have a sense of age, as well as the slate roof, all combining his use of materials, exquisite materials, really to create something very American. Even though it's meant to look very English, his eclectic use of architectural styles and materials contributed to that eclecticism that he's known for.
It's a masterpiece.
It is a masterpiece. It's this, built like an industrial building with its steel frame and poured concrete floors, but also the architectural salvage and the exterior look of not one but two English country houses, both inside and out. Really, Adler combined these elements uniquely for the Cranes to create grandeur and intimacy, elegance, and a stately home. Interestingly, the only thing that really dates the house to its own time and that north-facing facade are this pair of Griffin sculptures. There was a little touch of modernism there, with Adler working with the great sculptor Paul Manship, who was very prolific in his own time, like Adler, but not as famous now. He designed the Prometheus sculpture at Rockefeller Center. People recognize him for his Art Deco style, and the Griffins out back really stamped the date on the house to the era that the house was completed in 1928.
I was so excited to come here to see this magnificent carving in person because I'd read about the artist many years ago when I was taking design classes, Grinling Gibbons, and he's known as the King's Carver.
Grinling Gibbons carved these for the home of the former Earls of Essex in Kesbury Park, which is in Hertfordshire, England. And before it was raised in the early 1920s, Mr. Crane purchased them on the recommendation of David Adler for his great new English country manor house here in Ipswich, Massachusetts. So we have these beautiful three-dimensional, bold, Baroque carvings with the fruit and floral motifs. Some of those that we see also in the downspouts of the house. I think I mentioned to you earlier that he used some of the same vocabulary and motifs throughout the decoration. But they married some new paneling with all of this ornamental carving here over the mantels, around two picture surrounds on the other side of the library, as well as these beautiful bookcases with the ornamental pediments, the crown molding, and pediments over the door, as well as over here behind the window sections are the coats of arms for the Earls of Essex, still intact in the Crane Library.
It's absolutely beautiful, and it's preserving very important English history.
Absolutely is, and it's rare to find these in the United States. I don't know any other American home that has something quite like this. You find them in St. Paul's or in Hampton Court, all these.
Windsor Castle.
Yes, throughout England, but he's not, Grinling Gibbons isn't as well known here in the United States, but thanks to the Cranes and David Adler's recommendation that Mr. Crane purchase it for this great house in Ipswich, we are lucky to have this collection here at Castle Hill. Abram Poole was a good friend of David Adler's from his Princeton days when he went east to, he left Milwaukee to go to Lawrenceville Prep School in New Jersey and then on to Princeton where he met Abram Poole. And Abram Poole was an artist who he had help him with some designs here at Castle Hill. We're very lucky to have this oil on canvas mural in the Rotunda, the circular room outside the library that it looks like an Italian villa really, but in the ceiling it shows members of the Crane family. It's more or less a direct translation from Camera della Sposi in Mantua, Andrea Mantegna's late 15th century painting, but instead of the putti or the cherubs looking down at you, it's members of the Crane family, which is very fun to see. Florence Crane Jr., the daughter, Cornelius Crane, their maids, and even their Siamese cat, Abram Poole, tucked into the ceiling painting, as well as a reference people mistake for a crane, but it was actually a peacock, which is a reference for Juno and the goddess of marriage. Because the original room from which it was copied was the Camera della Sposi, the marriage chamber. So there we see all of that going on. And then also Abram Poole painted the two chimney breasts in the gallery. So there's a clock and a wind indicator, and behind that he has this very subtle painting of the sky and the four winds at each corner. So all sort of back to that sailing reference, the huge wind indicator which connects with the cupola, and there's a series of small wind indicators throughout the house. So that was all Abram Poole's design work behind the technology. In 1998, we achieved the status of the National Historic Landmark, which is the highest designation you can receive in this country. And we're very proud of that fact. It was 70 years later, after the house was completed, in 1928 and 1998, we have the National Historic Landmark status.
Adler designed some truly incredible moldings and trims and architectural features in this room, including this wonderful overmantel.
Yes, with that bold pediment. And this is separate from the Baroque carvings in that late 17th century style we see in the Crane Library. Here, Adler takes inspiration from the more Georgian taste, more that neoclassical. The Cranes had architectural salvage from two English houses. One was in Soho section of London, believed to be at one point, as marketed by W&J Sloane, the Hogarth House. So he had beautiful woodwork, and he was inspired from that and used that among 7 bedrooms and the upstairs sitting room, and we think possibly also some of the dining room here. He also worked with the antique dealer and cabinet maker in London, very famous Lenigon and Morant, and we have drawings of his showing this beautiful marble mantelpiece with the face, the dramatic swags, the bold egg and dart carvings, all reflecting back to his vocabulary throughout the woodwork as well, with fluted columns to provide sort of a discreet passage for the servants to deliver behind that, and this beautiful pediment you pointed out, and these lovely acanthus leaf scrolls along the side. And of course, always symmetry in the room with these rectangular vertical panels throughout. This beautiful bay area at the backside of the house, taking in the view, the glorious view of the ocean and the green Grand Allée sweeping lawn that the Cranes have that goes out to sea. We also have in the house, interestingly, the family, extended family members of the Crane had some of the original furniture, which came back to the house just 2 years ago. So we have their Regency pedestal table here in the middle of the dining room, and these very interesting Chippendale era, mid-18th century chairs with this carved stag's head on it and a very interesting splat. So those with their ivory leather seats, and we know that Francis Elkins sometimes used these leather seats and a light-colored leathers throughout the houses. We see this sort of combination of up-to-date Georgian style in this 1928 house.
These are really unique. I've never seen anything like that.
I hadn't either, really, and I don't know if they're from an English or Scottish country house with this wonderful stag's head, but they're unique, and we're very lucky to have them back in the collection here at Castle Hill.
This whole room is quite handsome.
It is, and it's also the color of it is unique and very popular at that time was this jade green. And also David Adler, when he did paintings or when he painted surfaces, he always had glaze paint. So there'd be a base color and then a glaze on top of it to give it a sense of an antique.
White. Yes,
that's right,
striae.
depth and a real sense, an antique look. So it was an older house. So as we're working to restore this house and the interiors, I always trust David Adler, and I never go wrong by trusting David Adler because he's absolutely right with the colors, the textures, the scale. The furniture is all a wonderful balance of different styles, uniquely blended to provide his own modern flair, but to these traditional styles put together and with sort of modern colors. David Adler not only used architectural salvage from Castleberry Park for the library, which was this single room of the late 17th century, but also a more Georgian taste was a 1732 townhouse from Soho area of London, thought to have been a home that William Hogarth, painter and satirist William Hogarth, lived in, which is now disproved, but nonetheless, W&J Sloane at the time marketed as Hogarth House. And in 1925, Mr. Crane purchased this for his new house with the recommendation of David Adler and used it amongst a number of bedrooms. And the upstairs sitting room really has a spectacular array of carvings and salvage from that house in the dining room as well. So we have that all made, again, to look like an old house in what's a new house, but he used that in the several rooms, and as well as the staircase. So there's a magnificent staircase. It would have been too small for this house. The scale here, we have 15, 16-foot ceilings, and the scale is a bit larger, wider steps, more comfortable American taste of that time. But so Adler gave the original staircase and the rooms that they didn't use from the Soho townhouse to the Art Institute of Chicago, which was part of the Richard T. Crane period rooms that they had in their collection, and had it recreated, staircase exactly as it was, with all the ornamental, the sort of semicurves and the beautiful twisted and turned newel posts, and had them recreated here at Castle Hill in the Great House. I absolutely do think classical architecture is relevant today and needed, and it's as in any artistic endeavor, whether it's music, theater, art, it's all, we all start from the classics, and, artists learn from the earlier history and where we came from in order to launch off from that. So I do think it's very relevant, certainly, to know all of those principles, but I also think there's a humanism and scale to classic architecture that's unparalleled. So I think it's very important to have that in our lives. The creature comforts that are really state-of-the-art American and things we update even today would be the kitchens and the bathrooms, and this is what we see at the Crane House. It really sets it apart from English country houses that you might visit, where the kitchen is in the basement. Here, it's on the first floor. We have very light-filled spaces for the servant staff, which is also different from the old English country houses. There are large windows. There's a dining room for the servants. There's a two-tiered butler's pantry. So there was the fine china upstairs and the more everyday china, a warming table, and then that passed through into this Delft tile-covered working kitchen. Also, a pastry room was connected to that, and a refrigerator. There were electric refrigerators at that time. So very much the American technology you do see in the state-of-the-art kitchens. as well as the Crane bathrooms, where it was more of a showroom for the Crane bathrooms at that time. We'll start with Mrs. Crane's bathroom. Has a green, beautiful, almost like a watercolor mottled green tub. And it was the first year that the Crane Company was marketing colored tubs. And really, you see that throughout this house. And so she had this elegant combination of the green tub and that sort of jade green glazing in her dressing room, and then a faux marbleized woodwork in her bathroom with green marble behind the tub and green marble sink. Very almost Art Deco. If we were to think that Frances Elkins had a hand in any of the bathrooms, I would think that certainly would be the one. And then Mr. Crane's is equally as elegant, but very much more masculine, with these very architectural, mirrored over his sink, glass legs, all silver, sterling silver plated fixtures, a tub with a view of the sunrise, actually, and then a shower and bath and toilet and very discreetly hidden behind these glass doors. And only the men's bathrooms had showers. Interestingly, the women just had the tubs. His daughter Florence had another unusual bathroom with éclumisé, which is like a reverse pane on glass, depictions of ships. The Cranes were great sailors, and he does have a little nod to this being a summer house. And then her brother Cornelius Crane has a blue and white scheme in his room with Delft tiles. And Adler, I know, often used Delftware tiles, and this striking blue and white pattern throughout Cornelius Crane's bathroom as well.